Homer's biography, that's a Greek poet. After well over 2005 years, we still cannot say for sure who created Odyssey and exactly how it was composed and precisely when it was written. Even though there is a little autobiographical information in the epic, and not much each much else to go on, and we can make some educated guesses based upon the research by top scholars. So, who wrote Odyssey? It's not sure, certain. However, some guesses we have, scholarly guesses, they say. Most early Greek had no doubt that there was a single individual named Homer to whom they attributed authorship of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Homeric hymns, that is the religious poems, celebrating the ancient Greeks and ancient gods. Although some 7 different cities claim to have been his birthplace, in which city uh, Homer was born, it is full of ambiguity. And uh, 7 Greek cities claimed that Homer was born in their city. Many thought Homer might have come from the island of Chios of the western coast of Asia Minor. So, out of these 7 cities, one cities that is spelled as Chios or Chios in the western Minor. This is the claimed name of the birthplace of Homer. So in ancient times, a family bearing his name and living there was said to consist of his descendants. So Homer is claimed that he was born in a city that is claimed as Chios. And there was a family living over there, that is the coast of Asia Minor, and that was one. Uh, Homer composed his poems in 2 different dialects. That is, one is Ionic Greek was a sub-dialect, and also another one is Aeolic Greek. So, uh, what we study Homer and uh, Homer Iliad and Odyssey, that was translated in Latin, that was in 7th century BC. But Homer wrote his works from a form that blended Ionic and Aeolic dialects. It is likely that he was a native or resident of the western part of Asia Minor. He probably was a bird or a rhapsode, a specialist in performing epic, and tradition has it that he was a blind, a theory based largely on his portrayal of Demodocus and the blind singer of Patience. A passage in his hymns that the somewhat romantic notion partly supported the fact that many such performers were blind. So Homer was blind and Homer was a performer, especially he could perform the religious poems or the epic poem. Especially Homer was very much famous in performing epic poems. However, some other debates are there. Such kind of blind performer are many when Iliad and Odyssey was composed. But the one information that Iliad and Odyssey was composed in Ionic Greek dialect and also the Aeolic. Both both dialect use the Greek alphabet. Writing simple, the Greek alphabet. So it means that there was a poet called Homer who had been living in Asia Minor and he wrote in this dialect, and that can be claimed that uh, Iliad and Odyssey was written by the Greek poet uh, Homer. In the first century, however, the preponderance of opinion seems to be the side of the single authorship. Some defend single authorship by citing William Shakespeare's varying approaches in King Lear and the Tempest, which deal with the fading kings but in contrasting ways. Others point out that the Iliad appears to have been composed fast and demonstrate the work of a younger man, while the Odyssey is more mature and reflects on an older author. So, if you compare that through the here, we have split up at issue are the authorship, origin, and the means of composition of the work. ইলিয়ট এবং ওডিসির মধ্যে আমরা যেরকম কম্পোজিশন এবং পোয়েটিক ওয়ার্ক দেখি, এই দুটো ওয়ার্ক দেখে scholars may have some doubt that whether these two writings, that these two great epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were different in style, different in language, different in rhetoric, and the other things. So in this figure, some scholars might conjecture that these two writings may not be written by a single author. However, such kind of incidents we found in case of William Shakespeare, the King Lear and the Tempest. So the King Lear is done in a way, but the Tempest that was written at the ending portion of his career, William Shakespeare career, that is done in more mature way. So within the same categories, yes, Iliad and the Odyssey can be written by same author, but Iliad was written when Homer was young, and the Odyssey was written when Homer was old or older and mature writer. That was the assumption. During the late 1920 decades and early 1930s, an American scholar named Milman Perry revolutionized classical studies by demonstrating conclusively that both the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed as an oral, formulaic style based on tradition and designed to help the uh, rhapsode or rhapsody perform a long piece from memory. Okay, so in 1920 and 30 decades, an American scholar he said that yes, these two um, great epic, the Iliad and the Odyssey, these are the oral epic. Still, that result is prevalent as we see that we know that the Iliad and the Odyssey are called the primary epic, and they are the oral epic. And at that time, the people would compile the seven folktales and would recite before audience, and that compilation become a great epic like Iliad and the Odyssey. So one thing is supported by the Paris revolutionized revolutionized studies that the Odyssey and the Iliad, these are the oral epic. And the performer often accompanied himself with a lyre and a musical instrument, and metrical phrases were used as mnemonics device. Mnemonic devices, just to remember the similarity in pronunciation, just to remember the phrase. And everyday language was altered to fit this poetic language. that would account for the elevated style that has long been attributed to the work. So Paris discovery clearly alters how readers look at Odyssey, Homer Odyssey. And the Harold Bloom in 1996 think that Homer, if he existed, was no more than one editor or organizer of the poems created by others, perhaps over generation. Others such as Seth L. Skein, reading the Odyssey 1996, credit the poet with considerable creativity while welcoming the evidence of the oral tradition. So Skein points out that Greek apparently had access to the Phoenician alphabet by the third quarter of the 8th century BC, and that a poet trained in the oral tradition could have written down and dictated to a scribe the Odyssey as readers now know it. He sees literary as well as folk or traditional influence in the creation of the biography. So, and although some scholars still remain that the epic was written in its present form in the 6th century BC in Athens. Mounting evidence indicates an earlier date. The weight of the scholarship implies that the Odyssey was probably composed and possibly written down about 700 BC. The most convincing argument is that the Iliad was written first. Both epics probably were dated in the form we know them by the same poet, a theory that is consistent with the views of those who see unusual geniuses as well as the technical similarities in their work. So while the poet may have composed his work completely, he probably borrowed metrical phrases and content from other parts. And these elements, after all, were the uh, rhapsodes tools in the oral tradition belonging to all. Although relying significantly on the folk tradition and the devices of the oral creativity, the version of the Odyssey that we now have seem to have been influenced most strongly to the single poet, probably a veteran Rashpoti who likely dedicated to scribe and wrote down it itself. Let's call him Homer. So there is a debate whether Homer is a single person or not, and whether both Iliad and the Odyssey was written by a single author named Homer. Through the investigation and research work, it is observed that the Odyssey and Iliad both are written by a single author, and though these two epics were written in two Greek dialects, so it can be called that these two epics were written by the Greek poets, and these two poets, two epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, these two poets were written in two different periods. Iliad first and Odyssey successively. For this reason, we see the more skillful hand at writing Odyssey, but less skillful hand or younger or novice hand in case of like Iliad. So this is the history, and in this present format, Iliad was written in 700 century BC, 700 BC before the death of Jesus Christ. So these are the cases about uh, the writer Homer and the poem Odyssey. However, Odyssey is written by more mature